Metro 2033, Dmitry Glukhovsky, Chapter 16, The Songs of the Dead. There are no secret entrances there, and there never were. Really, don't you know that yourself? Tretyak had raised his voice with displeasure, and his words flew at Artyom. They were returning from duty, back to Kievskaya. The stalker and Tretyak walked a little behind the others and animatedly discussed something. When Artyom also fell back to take part in their conversation, they began to whisper, and he was left to join the main group again. The young Oleg, who was skipping along, trying not to drop behind the adults, and refusing to climb onto his father's shoulders, immediately and happily grabbed him by the hand. "I'm a missile man, too," he announced. Artyom looked at the boy with surprise. He had been alongside when Melnik introduced Tretyak to him, and most likely had heard this word by chance. Did he understand what it meant? "Only don't tell anybody," added Oleg hurriedly. "The others aren't allowed to know it. It's a secret." "Okay, I won't not tell anyone." Artyom played up to him. "It's no shame, quite the opposite. You should be proud of it, but others might say bad things about you out of envy," the boy explained, although Artyom hadn't even intended to ask anything. Anton was walking about 10 paces ahead, lighting the path. Nodding at his frail figure, the child loudly whispered, "Papa said not to show anyone, but you know how to keep secrets. Here." He took a small fragment of cloth from an inside pocket. Artyom shined his flashlight on it. It was a torn tab, a circle of a thick, rubberized substance about 7 centimeters in diameter. On one side it was completely black. On the other was portrayed the intersection of 3 incomprehensible oblong objects on a dark background, not unlike one of the 6-pointed paper snowflakes with which they decorated VDNKH for the new year. One of the objects was standing upright, and Artyom recognized it as a cartridge from a machine gun or a sniper's rifle, but with wings attached to the bottom. But he did not recognize the other 2 identical yellow ones with rings on both sides. The mysterious snowflake was enclosed in a stylized wreath, such as on old cockades, and there were letters around the circle of the tab. But the color on them was faded, so that Artyom was able to read only "Troops and also the word Usia, which was written below, beneath the figure. If he had had a little more time, he might have been able to understand what the boy showed him, but he didn't. "Hey, Olejek, come here, there's something for you," Anton called to his son. "What is it?" Artyom asked the boy before he grabbed the tab from him and concealed it in his pocket. "RVA," Oleg carefully articulated, beaming with pride. Then he winked at him and ran to his father. Having climbed to the platform by stepladder, the Outlook members began to disperse and go home. Anton's wife was waiting for him right at the exit. With tears in her eyes, she flung herself to meet young Oleg, caught him by his arm, and then bawled at her husband. "Are you trying to upset me? What am I supposed to think? The child left home several hours ago. Why am I supposed to think about everyone? You're like a child yourself. You couldn't bring him home," she cried. "Lan, please, not in front of people," Anton muttered, looking round in embarrassment. "I just couldn't leave the watch. Think about what you are saying, an outpost commander, and suddenly he leaves his post. A commander! Go ahead and command! As if you don't know what is going on here. Over there, a neighbor's youngster disappeared a week ago." Melnik and Tretyak quickened the pace and didn't even stop to say goodbye to Anton, leaving him and his wife in private. Artyom hurried after them. For a long time after, although one could no longer make out the words, the weeping and reproaches of Anton's wife reached them. All 3 were heading to the office facilities, where the station's chief of staff was located. After several minutes, they already were seated in the room with the hanging threadbare carpets. The chief himself, having nodded knowingly, left when the stalker asked to leave them alone. "It seems you don't have a passport?" Melnik remarked, turning towards Artyom. He shook his head. The document had been confiscated by the fascists, and, without it, he had been turned into a social outcast. Hansa, the Red Line, and Paulus would not accept him. While the stalker was beside him, no one asked personal questions of Artyom, but having found himself alone, he would have to wander between the cast-off flag stations and the uncivilized stations, such as Kievskaya. and he couldn't even dream of returning to VDNK. I won't be able to take you to Hansa without a passport. I'll have to find the necessary people for it first, Melnick said, as if confirming his thoughts. It may be possible to obtain a new one, but of course this will take time. The shortest route to Mayakovskaya is along the ring, like it or not. What do we do? Artyom shrugged his shoulders. He was inclined to agree with the stalker. It was impossible to wait, and he also wasn't able to get around Hansa to Mayakovskaya himself. The tunnel that adjoined it from the other side came straight from Tverskaya. To return to the lair of the fascists, let alone to the station that had been transformed into a dungeon, would be folly, a dead end. It will be better if Tretyak and I go together now to Mayakovskaya, Melnick said. We'll look for an entrance to D6. We will find it, return for you, and perhaps something will come up about a passport. If we don't find an entrance, we will come back anyway. You won't have to wait for us long. We can get there quickly. We'll get it done in a day. Will you wait? He looked at Artyom quizzically. Artyom shrugged his shoulders again. He felt that they were treating him like a child. He'd served his purpose and told them about the danger, and now they didn't want him under their feet. Excellent, the stalker said. Expect us towards morning, and we'll travel straight here so as not to lose any time. As regards food and lodging, we will discuss it all with Arkady Semyonovich. He won't hurt you. It seems that's it. No, it's not all. He felt in a pocket and withdrew from there that same blood-stained sheet of paper on which was the layout and keys. Take it, I copied it for myself. Who knows how things will turn out? Only, don't show it to anyone. Melnick and Tretyak left in less than an hour later, having spoken beforehand with the station chief. The punctual Arkady Semyonovich immediately took Artyom to his tent, and inviting him to have dinner with him in the evening, left to rest. The tent for guests stood a little out of the way, and although it also was maintained in fine condition, Artyom felt very uncomfortable in it from the very outset. He glanced outside and again was convinced that the rest of the quarters were crowded together, and all of them were located as far as possible from the entrances to the tunnels. Now that the stalker had gone and Artyom was alone in the unfamiliar station, the sensation of unease that he had experienced earlier returned. It had been scary at Kievskaya in just the same way, simply frightening, without any obvious cause. It was already getting late. The voices of the children were dying away, and the adults only rarely left their tents. Artyom did not want to stroll around the platform at all. Having read through the letter from the dying Daniel a third time, Artyom couldn't stand it and left for dinner with Arkady Semyonovich half an hour earlier than the agreed time. The office facility's anteroom now had been converted into a kitchen, and an attractive girl, a little older than Artyom, was working there. Meat and some kind of root vegetables were stewing in a large frying pan, and boiling next to them were some of the white tubers which he'd eaten at Anton's. The station chief himself sat next to a stool and paged through a tattered booklet, on the cover of which was painted a picture of a revolver and women's legs in black stockings. Seeing Artyom, Arkady Semyonovich laid the book aside with embarrassment. It's boring for us here, of course. He smiled knowingly at the youth. Come with me into the office. Katerina will lay the table for us there, and we'll drink for a while. He winked. Now the room with the carpets and skull looked completely different. Lit by a table lamp with a green cloth lampshade, it had become a little more comfortable. The tension which had haunted Artyom on the platform dissipated without a trace in the rays of this lamp. Arkady Semyonovich drew a small bottle from the cupboard and poured a brown liquid with a head-reeling aroma into an unusual round-bellied glass. Only a little came out, a finger's worth, and Artyom thought that this bottle must have cost more than a whole box of the home brew he had tried at Kitaygorod. And a little cognac. Arkady Semyonovich responded to his curious look. Armenian, of course, but it's almost 30 years old. Bottoms up. The chief dreamily looked up at the ceiling. Don't be afraid, it's not contaminated. I checked it myself with the dosimeter. The unfamiliar drink was very strong, but the pleasant flavor and sharp aroma made it palatable. Artyom didn't swallow it all at once, but tried to savor it, following the example of his host. A fire was slowly breaking out inside him, it seemed, but it gradually cooled and turned into an acceptably comforting heat. The room had become even more agreeable. and Arkady Semyonovich even more likable. A surprising thing. Screwing up his eyes in satisfaction, Artyom commented, "It's good, right?" About a year and a half ago, the stalkers found completely untouched groceries at Krasnopresenskaya, the station chief explained, in a cellar, as they often had done previously. The sign had fallen off and no one had noticed it. But one of us recalled that earlier, before it had crashed. Sometimes he had looked in there, so he decided to check it. It had been there so many years it had become better. Because we knew each other, he gave me 2 bottles for 100 bullets. They asked 200 for one at Kitaygorod. He took one more small swallow, then thoughtfully looked at the lamp's light through the cognac. They called him Vasya, this stalker, the chief informed him. He was a good man, not some kind of kid who runs after nothing, but a serious young man. He fetched all the good things. As soon as he returned from above, he came to me first. "Well," he says, "Semyonich, some new supplies." Arkady Semyonovich smiled weakly. "Did something happen to him?" Artyom asked. He loved Krasnopresenskaya very much. He repeated all the time that it was a real El Dorado there, Arkady Semyonovich said sadly. Nothing touched in one Stalinist high-rise. It's understandable why it was there all safe and sound. The zoo was right across the road. Just who would poke their head in there at Krasnopresenskaya? Such fear. He was desperate, Vasyatka. He was always taking risks. And he got into a mess at the end. They dragged him into the zoo, and his partner barely managed to bolt. So, let's drink to him. The chief breathed heavily and poured one more for each of them. Recalling the unusually high price of the cognac, Artyom was on the verge of protesting, but Arkady Semyonovich decisively placed the round-bellied glass into his hand, explaining that a refusal would insult the memory of the reckless stalker who had obtained this divine drink. By that time, the girl had set the table, and Artyom and Arkady Semyonovich moved on to ordinary but decent moonshine. The meat had been prepared delightfully. "It's unpleasant for you at the station?" After an hour and a half, Artyom was frank. "It's scary here. Something is oppressive." "We're used to it." Arkady Semyonovich vaguely shook his head. "And people live here. It's no worse than at some—" "No, don't think that I don't understand." Having decided that the Kievskaya chief had taken offense, Artyom hastened to calm him. "You certainly are doing all that is possible. But there is something going on here. Everyone talks about just one thing, that people are disappearing. They lie." Arkady Semyonovich cut him off, but then he added, "Not all are disappearing, only the children. Are the dead taking them? Who knows who is taking them? I myself don't believe in the dead. I have seen dead in my lifetime, make no mistake. They don't take anyone anywhere. They themselves lie quietly. But there, beyond the blockage," Arkady Semyonovich waved a hand in the direction of Park Pobedy and nearly lost his balance, "is someone. That's definite. And it is impossible for us to go there." "Why?" Artyom tried to focus on his glass, but it had been growing fuzzier the whole time and seemed to creep away somewhere. "Wait a little, I'll show you." The station chief moved away from the table with a crash, got up with difficulty, and, rocking, went to the cupboard. Digging around on one of the shelves, he carefully lifted into the light a long metal needle with a barb by the thick end. "What's that?" Artyom frowned. "That's what I would like to know." "Where did you get it?" "From the neck of a lookout who was guarding the right tunnel. Hardly any blood came out, but he lay there all blue and foaming at the mouth." "Did they come from Park Pobedy?" Artyom was guessing. "Damned if anyone knows," mumbled Arkady Semyonovich, and at the same time he upset their glasses. "Only," he added, putting the needle back into the cupboard, "don't tell anyone." "But why haven't you told anyone yourself? They'll help you and people will settle down." "Well, no one would settle down. Everyone would run away like rats." "They're already running now. Not to defend themselves from anyone here, there is no enemy. He isn't visible, and that's why it's frightening. So I show them this needle, and what? Do you think everything will settle? That's ridiculous. Everyone will disappear, the bastards, and leave me here alone. And what kind of a station chief will I be without people? A captain without a ship?" He had raised his voice, but he let out a squeak and was silent. "Arkasha, Arkasha, you don't have to be like that. Everything's okay." The girl sat down, startled, beside him, and stroked his head. Artyom sadly understood through the alcoholic fog that she wasn't the chief's daughter. All of them, the sons of bitches, will run, like rats from a ship. I'll be alone, but we won't give in. He hadn't calmed down. Artyom stood up with difficulty and unsteadily walked toward the exit. The guard at the door quizzically snapped his fingers in his face, nodding at Arkady Semyonovich's office. "Dead drunk," Artyom muttered. "It's better not to touch him until tomorrow." And rocking slightly, he plodded towards his tent. He had to find the way. He tried a few times to get into someone else's quarters, but crude male curses and piercing female squeals told him that he had gone into the wrong tent. The moonshine had turned out to be more potent than cheap home brew, and he had started to feel its full strength only now. The arches and columns floated before his eyes, and, to top it off, he was beginning to feel sick. At a normal hour, perhaps, someone would have helped Artyom reach the guest tent, but now the station seemed completely empty. Even the posts at the exits from the tunnels were likely to have been abandoned. 3 or 4 dim lamps remained lit in the whole station, and apart from those, the whole platform had been plunged into darkness. When Artyom stopped and looked around more attentively, it began to appear to him that the gloom had been filled by something, and it was stirring quietly. Not believing his eyes, he plodded in the direction of one especially suspicious place with the curiosity and bravery of a drunk. Not far from the transfer to the Filevskaya line, at one of the arches, the movements of blobs of darkness were not gradual, as in other corners, but sharp and almost deliberate. "Hey, who's there?" Having approached to a distance of about 15 steps, he cried out. No one answered, but it seemed to him that an elongated shadow was oozing out of a particularly dark spot. It almost merged with the gloom. However, Artyom was certain that someone was looking at him from the darkness. He was shaking, but kept his balance and took another step. The shadow abruptly decreased in size, as if it had shrunk and slipped away. A sudden, sickening smell struck his nostrils, and Artyom recoiled. What did it smell like? A picture of something he had seen in the tunnel on the approaches to the Fourth Reich arose in front of his eyes. Bodies heaped on each other with hands tied behind their backs. The smell of decomposition? At that very moment, with a hellish speed, like an arrow flying from a crossbow, the shadow dashed towards him. A pallid face covered with strange spots with deeply sunken eyes appeared in front of his eyes for a second. "The dead!" wheezed Artyom. Then his head split into thousands of parts. The ceiling began to dance and turn over, and everything was fading away. Emerging and submerging into a feeble quiet, some kind of voices could be heard. Some kind of visions flashed up, then disappeared. "Mama won't let me. She'll be upset," the child said from not far away. "It was really impossible today," she cried all evening. "No, I'm not afraid. You are not frightful, and you sing beautifully. I just don't want Mama to cry again. Don't feel hurt. Well, for a short while, maybe. Will we return before morning?" "Time's a-wasting. Time's a-wasting," a low male voice repeated. "We don't have all day. They're close enough already. Get up. Don't lie there. Get up. If you lose hope, if you flinch or give up, others will quickly take your place. I'm continuing the struggle. You should too. Get up. You don't understand." "Who is it again?" "To the chief." "As a guest? Well, of course, I'll bring one." "Go ahead. You help too. Shake a leg, at least." "Severe. Don't you care what he has there jingling in his pockets?" "Well, okay, I'm joking. That's all. We've gone as far as we can, and I'm leaving." The tent's flap was dramatically moved aside, and the beam of a flashlight struck him in the face. "Are you Artyom?" He could barely make out the face, but the voice sounded young. Artyom jumped up from the cot, but his head suddenly began to spin, and he felt ill. A dull pain throbbed in the back of his head, and each time he touched it, it felt like fire. His hair was matted there, most likely from dried blood. What had happened to him? "May I come in?" the arrival asked, and not waiting for permission, stepped into the tent, closing the flap behind him. He shoved a tiny metallic object into Artyom's hand. Having finally turned on his own flashlight, Artyom looked at it. It was a cartridge converted to a screw-on capsule, exactly the same as the one Hunter had presented to him. Not believing his own eyes, Artyom tried to open the top, but it slipped. His hands were sweating from the excitement. Finally, a tiny piece of paper fell into the light. Was it really a missive from Hunter? Unforeseen complications. The exit to D6 has been blocked. Tretyak has been killed. Wait for me. Don't go anywhere. We need time to get organized. I will try to return as soon as possible. Melnik. Artyom reread the note yet again to analyze its contents. Tretyak has been killed? The exit to Metro 2 is blocked? But then this meant that all their plans and all their hopes had turned to dust and ashes. He looked at the envoy in a befuddled manner. Melnik has ordered you to stay here and wait for him, the visitor confirmed. Tretyak is dead. They killed him. With a poison needle, Melnik said. We don't know who did it. Now he'll be leading a mobilization effort. That's it. I have to run. Will there be an answer? Artyom thought a little about what he could write to the stalker. What can I do? What is there to hope for now? Maybe drop everything and return to VDNKH to be with those near and dear in the last minutes? He shook his head. The envoy turned around in silence and exited. Artyom dropped to the cot and began to meditate. There was simply nowhere for him to go right now. He was neither able to go to the ring nor return to Smolenskaya without a passport and without an escort. His only hope was that Arkady Semyonovich would be just as hospitable in the coming days as he had been the day before. It was day at Kievskaya. The lamp burnt twice as brightly, and alongside the office facilities where the station chief's apartment was located, another mercury lamp gave off the light of day. Wincing from the pain in his head, Artyom plodded to the chief's office. A guard stopped him at the entrance with a gesture. Noise came from within. Several men were conversing in raised voices. He's busy, the guard explained. Wait if you'd like. Several minutes later, Anton flew from the room like a shot. The office boss ran out right on his heels. Although his hair was perfectly combed once more, he had bags beneath his eyes, and his face was noticeably swollen and covered with silver stubble. But what can I do? What? The chief cried, chasing after Anton, and then, spitting, smacked himself with his hand on the forehead. Are you up? Having noticed Artyom, he smiled wryly. I have to stay here with you until Melnik returns, Artyom declared apologetically. I know, they reported it. Let's go inside. They gave me an order concerning you. Arkady Semyonovich invited him into the room with a gesture. So I've been told to photograph you for a passport while you wait for Melnik. I still have the equipment here from when Kievskaya was a normal station. Then maybe he'll acquire a blank passport and we'll make the document for you. Sitting Artyom onto a stool, he pointed the lens of a small plastic camera at him. There was a blinding flash, and Artyom spent the next 5 minutes completely blinded, looking around helplessly. Excuse me, I forgot to warn you. You're starving. Come in. Katya will feed you, but I won't have any time for you today. It's getting worse for us here. Anton's oldest son disappeared during the night. He's giving the whole station a hard time now. And for what? And those here told me they found you this morning between the platforms with a bloody head. What happened? I don't remember. Most likely I fell down when I was drunk. Artyom hadn't answered immediately. Yes, it's good that we had a sit-down yesterday. The chief grinned. Okay, Artyom, it's time for me to get to work. Drop by a little later. Artyom slid down from the stool. The young Oleg's face was in front of him. Anton's oldest son? Was it really him? He recalled how the night before the boy had turned the handle of his music box, placed it on the iron of the pipe, and then said that only small children are afraid that the dead would take them away if they walked into the tunnels and listened to the pipes. A chill swept over Artyom. Was it true? Did it happen because of him? Once more he glanced helplessly at Arkady Semyonovich, began to open his mouth, but he went outside without speaking. Returning to his tent, Artyom took a seat on the floor and sat in silence for some time, looking into the void. Now it was beginning to seem to him that, having chosen him for this mission, someone unknown had damned him at the same time. Almost everyone who had decided to share at least part of the way with him had died. Bourbon, Mikhail Porfiryevich, and his grandson Daniel. Khan had disappeared without a trace, and even the fighters of the Revolutionary Brigade who had rescued Artyom may have been killed at the very next crossing. Now Tretyak. But the young Oleg? Had Artyom brought death to his companions? Not understanding what was going on, he jumped up, threw his rucksack and machine gun onto his back, grabbed a flashlight and went out to the platform. He walked mechanically to the place where they had assaulted him during the night. Approaching closer, he froze. The dead man looked at him through the dim haze of a drunken memory. He remembered it all. It was not a dream. He had to find Oleg, or at least help Anton search for his son. It was his fault. He hadn't looked after the lad. He had allowed Oleg to play his strange games with the pipes, and now he was here, safe and sound. But the boy had disappeared, and Artyom was convinced that he had not run away. Something bad and inexplicable had happened here during the night, and Artyom was doubly guilty, because he may have been able to prevent it, but he had been incapable. He looked at the spot where the terrifying stranger had hidden in the shadows. A heap of garbage had been dumped there, but sifting through it, Artyom only frightened a stray cat. Having searched the platform without result, he approached the tracks and jumped down to the rails. The guards at the entrance to the tunnel lazily looked him over and warned that he went into the crossings at his own risk and that no one there would take any responsibility for him. This time, Artyom didn't go through the same tunnel as the day before, but took the second, the parallel one. As the lookout commander had said, this crossing was also blocked. The guard post was located at the blockage. An iron barrel served as a stove, and there were bags piled around. Alongside them there was a handcar, loaded with buckets of coal. The lookouts sitting on the bags were whispering about something, and on his approach, jumped up from their seats, intently eyeing Artyom. But then one of them gave the okay, and the others calmed down and settled in as before. Taking a closer look, Artyom recognized Anton as the commander, and hurriedly mumbling something awkward, turned and began to walk back. His face was on fire. He was unable to look into the eyes of the man whose son had disappeared because of him. Artyom plodded on, lowering his head, repeating under his breath, "It wasn't my fault. I wasn't able. What could I have done?" The splash of light from his flashlight skipped ahead of him. Suddenly he noticed a small object lying desolately in the shadow between two ties. Even from the distance it seemed familiar to him, and his heart beat faster. Bending over, Artyom picked the small box off the ground. He turned the handle, and the box answered with that tinkling, dreary melody. Oleg's music box, thrown or accidentally dropped by him here. Artyom threw down his rucksack and began studying the tunnel walls twice as hard. Not far away was a door leading to office facilities, but Artyom discovered behind it only a ruined public loo. 20 more minutes of tunnel inspection didn't get him anywhere. Returning to his rucksack, the young man sank to the ground and leaned back against the wall. Throwing back his head, stared at the ceiling, exhausted. After a second, he once more was on his feet, and the beam of the flashlight, fluttering, revealed a black gap, hardly noticeable in the darkened concrete of the ceilings. There was a loosely closed hatch just above the very place where Artyom had picked up Oleg's music box. However, there was no way to reach the hatch. The ceiling was more than 3 meters high. A solution presented itself to him in a flash. Grasping the box he had found and throwing his rucksack onto the rails, Artyom raced back to the lookouts. He was no longer afraid to look Anton in the eyes. Slowing his pace at the approach to the post so the lookouts wouldn't panic, Artyom approached Anton and in a whisper told him about his discovery. 2 minutes later they left the post, to the questioning looks of the rest, alternately operating the handles of the handcar. They stopped the handcar directly beneath the hatch. The handcar was just high enough that Artyom, climbing onto Anton's shoulders, could reach and move the cover, haul himself inside, and then pull up his partner. Although the tight corridor went off in both directions, Anton decisively moved in the direction of Park Pobedy. Several seconds later, it became clear that he had been right. An oblong cartridge case shone in the dim light. It was one of those that Melnick had given the lad the day before. Inspired by the discovery, Anton broke into a trot. He went about another 20 meters to the place where the access corridor ran into the wall, and another hatch, also half open, blackened an opening in the floor. Anton confidently began to lower himself down. Before Artyom could manage to object, he had already disappeared. There was a crash from the opening, swearing, and then a choked voice said, "Be careful when you jump. It's about a 3-meter drop. Come on, I'll shine the light for you." Placing his hands on the edge, Artyom hung down and, rocking several times, unclenched his fingers, trying to get both legs between the ties. "How will we get ourselves back out of here?" he asked, straightening up. "We'll figure something out." Anton dismissed the problem with a wave of his hand. "Are you certain that they didn't think you were dead?" Artyom shrugged his shoulders. Despite the pain in the back of the head, the thought that some being had attacked him last night at Kievskaya seemed absurd now that he was sober. "We'll go to Park Pobedy," Anton decided. "If there's trouble about, the threat can only come from there. You should feel it too. You were with us at the station yourself." "But why didn't you say anything to us yesterday?" Artyom asked, catching up to Anton and trying to keep pace with him. "The boss didn't allow it," he answered sullenly. "Semyonovich is really afraid of panic, and he has said not to spread rumors. He fusses over his position. But everyone has his limits. I told him ages ago that they couldn't keep it a secret forever. 3 children have disappeared in the last 2 months, and 4 families have fled the station. And there was our guard with that needle in his neck. No, he says panic will ensue and we'll lose control. He's a coward." Anton spat out in sudden anger. "But who made that needle?" Artyom stopped in the middle of his sentence, and Anton stopped dead in his tracks. "What's that again? Did you see it?" the lookout asked, taken aback. Artyom did not reply, and so he stopped, staring at the floor, and only moving the flashlight from side to side in order to see better what the lookout was pointing at. A gigantic figure had been crudely drawn in white on the floor. It was a twisting outline about 40 centimeters wide and about 2 meters long, resembling a crawling snake or worm. From one side, a bulge resembling a head was visible, and that gave it even greater similarity to a huge reptile. "A snake," Artyom offered. "Maybe they just spilled some paint?" Anton tried to joke. "No, they didn't just spill something. Here's the head. It's looking in that direction. It's crawling to Park Pobedy." "So we'll follow it." Several hundred meters further on, they found 3 cartridge cases in the middle of the path. They both started walking more briskly. "Good lad," Anton said with pride. "Wouldn't you just know he would think of leaving a trail?" Artyom nodded. He was becoming ever more certain that, while the unknown creature had been able to get to him without a sound, the boy was still alive. But would Oleg have agreed to go with his mysterious kidnapper willingly? Then why would he have marked his trail? Artyom grew quiet for several minutes, and so did Anton. The pungent darkness dissipated the recent joy and hope, and he once more became just a little frightened. In hoping to make amends to the father, he had forgotten all the warnings and terrible tales retold in whispers. He had forgotten the stalker's order not to leave Kievskaya. Anton was tearing ahead to find his son. But why was Artyom going to the ominous Park Pobedy? Why was he neglecting himself and his primary mission? For a second he recalled the strange people from Polyanka and the discussion about fate, and he felt relieved. But the relief only lasted about 10 minutes, just up to the next symbol portraying a snake. This figure was twice as large as the earlier one, and it looked as if it was supposed to convince travelers they were going in the right direction. However, Artyom was not entirely happy about it. The tunnel seemed endless. They walked and walked forever, and more than 2 hours already had passed by Artyom's calculations. The third painted giant snake was more than 10 meters long, and they heard something there. Anton froze, turning his ear towards the tunnel, and Artyom listened too. Strange sounds were coming from the depths of the crossings in fits and starts. At first, he couldn't make them out, but later he understood. A chant similar to the one the pipes had played to the music box at Kievskaya was being accompanied by the pounding of drums. "Not far now." Anton nodded. Time, which had already been slipping by slowly, nearly stood still. Looking at his partner, Artyom realized with startling clarity that he was nodding too dramatically, as if his head were twitching in convulsions. When Anton began to glide down onto his side, looking comically like a toy animal stuffed with rags, Artyom thought that he might catch him, because there was plenty of time for it. Then a light prick in his shoulder stopped him from doing so. Taking a puzzled look at where it smarted, Artyom discovered a feathered steel needle stuck in his jacket. Nothing came of his intention to pull it out. His whole body was petrified, and then suddenly it was as if it had disappeared. His feeble legs gave way to the forces of gravity, and Artyom ended up on the ground. At the same time, he remained almost totally conscious, but it became increasingly difficult to breathe. He was unable to move his extremities. He heard footsteps near him, swift and weightless. The approaching being could not be human. Artyom had learned to recognize human footsteps long ago on the patrols at VDNK. A sudden unpleasant smell reached his nose. 1, 2. Strangers laid out, someone overhead said. I'm a good shot. It was far away. The neck, shoulder, another responded. The voices were strange, devoid of any intonation. Flat, they reminded one mostly of the monotone drone of the wind in the tunnels. However, they were definitely human voices. To eat, well aimed. That's what the great worm wants, the first voice had continued. To eat. 1, you 2, me, we carry the strangers home, the second added. The picture before him gave Artyom a start. They tore him from the ground, jarringly. For a fraction of a moment, a face flashed in front of his eyes, narrow, with dark, deep-set eyes. Then they put out the flashlights, and it became pitch black, and only with the flood of blood to his head did Artyom understand that they were dragging him somewhere roughly, like a sack. The strange conversation continued for a time, although the phrases were intermixed now with an intense groaning. A paralyzing needle, not poison. Why? That's what the commander ordered. That's what the priest ordered. The great worm wanted it that way. It's okay to save the meat. You're smart. You and the priest are friends. The priest is teaching you to eat. 1, 2, the enemies are coming. There's a smell of gunpowder in the air. Fire. A bad enemy. How do they get here? I don't know. The commander and Vartan are doing the interrogation. You and I are the hunters. It is good that the great worm is happy. You and I will get a reward. A lot to eat, boots, a jacket. A lot to eat, no jacket, no boots. I'm young. I hunt the enemies. It is good. There's a lot, a reward. I'm happy. This day is okay. Vartan brings a new young one. You, we hunt the enemies. The great worm is happy. The people sing. A holiday. A holiday. I'm happy. Dances. Vodka. I dance with Natasha. Natasha and the commander, they dance. Not you. I am young, strong. The commander is very old. Natasha is young. I hunt enemies brave. It is good. Natasha and I, we dance. Not too far away, new voices could be heard, and an argument had broken out. Artyom guessed that they had brought them to the station. Here it was almost as dark as in the tunnels. Only one small campfire was burning in the whole place. They threw them nonchalantly onto the floor next to it. Someone's steel fingers gripped him by the beard and turned him face up. Several people of an unimaginably strange appearance were standing around. They were almost stark naked, and their heads were shaved bare, but it seemed they were not at all cold. On the forehead of each could be seen a wavy line, similar to the pictures at the crossing. Their small stature caused them to appear unhealthy, sunken cheeks, pale skin, but they radiated some kind of superhuman strength. Artyom recalled with what difficulty Melnik had borne the wounded 10 from the library, and he compared this with how quickly these strange creations had brought them to the station. A long arrow was in nearly each one's hand. Artyom recognized with surprise that they were made from the plastic sheathings that are used for spacing and insulating bundles of electrical wires. Huge steel bayonets hung on their belts, as from old Kalashnikov machine guns. All these strange people were approximately of the same age. There was no one here older than 30. They scrutinized them in silence for some time. Then the only one of the men wearing a beard and with a red line on his forehead said, "Okay, I am happy. These are the enemies of her great worm, the people of the machines. Evil people, tender meat. The great worm is satisfied. Sharup, Vovan are brave. I will take the people of the machines to the prison and interrogate them. Holiday tomorrow, all good people will eat the enemies. Vovan, which needle? The paralyzer?" "Yes, the paralyzer," a thick-set man with a blue line on his forehead said. "A paralyzer is good." "The meat won't be spoiled?" the bearded one said. "Vovan, Sharup, get the enemies and come with me to the prison." The light began to recede. New voices were calling nearby. Someone inarticulately expressed his delight. Someone wailed mournfully. Then singing could be heard, low, barely audible, and not good. It seemed as if the dead really were singing. and Artyom recalled the tales that made their way around Park Pobedy. Then they put him on the ground again, flung Anton alongside, and before long he lost consciousness. It was as if someone had shoved him, suggested that he had to get up right away. Stretching, he lit a lantern, covering it with his hand so as not to hurt the sensitive, half-asleep eyes, and inspected the tent. Where was the machine gun? And he went to the station. He was so homesick, but now, when he again had turned up at VDNK, he was not at all happy about it. The smoky ceiling, emptied tents filled with bullet holes, and the heavy ash in the air. Here, it seemed, something awful had happened, and the station was strikingly different from how he remembered it. In the distance, most likely from the passage at the other end of the platform, wild howls were heard, as if they were slicing up someone there. 2 emergency lamps sparsely lit the station, their weak beams penetrating the lazy tufts of smoke with difficulty. There was no one on the whole platform, except for a small girl playing on the floor next to one of the neighboring tents. Artyom was on the verge of asking her what had happened here, and where the rest had disappeared to. But catching sight of him, the girl began to cry loudly, and he thought better of it. The tunnels from VDNKH to the Botanical Garden. If the inhabitants of his station had gone anywhere, then it would be there. If they had run to the center, to Hansa, they wouldn't have left him and the child alone. Jumping onto the track, Artyom moved toward the dark void of the entrance. It's dangerous without weapons, he thought. But there was nothing to lose, and he had to reconnoiter the situation. Had the Dark Ones suddenly been able to penetrate the defenses? Then any hope lay with him. He had to find out the truth and report it to the Southern Allies. The darkness enveloped him just beyond the entrance, and fear came with the darkness. He could see absolutely nothing visible ahead, but he could hear disgusting, chomping sounds. He regretted once more his lack of a machine gun, but it was too late to retreat. Steps began to sound in the distance, and then came ever closer. It was as if they approached when Artyom was moving forward and stopped when he stopped. Something similar had happened to him, but when and how he couldn't recall. It was very frightening, approaching the unseen and unknown. An adversary? His trembling knees did not allow him to move quickly, and time was on the side of the terror. A cold sweat ran down his temples. He felt more ill at ease with every passing second. Finally, when the steps were only about 3 meters from him, Artyom could not hold back, and stumbling, falling, and lifting himself up, he raced back to the station. Falling a 3rd time, his weakened legs refused to sustain him, and he understood that death was imminent. And everything on this earth is a consequence of the great worm. Once the whole world consisted of stone, and there was nothing on it except stone. There was no air, and there was no water. There was no light, and there was no fire. There was no man, and there was no beast. There was only dead stone. And then the great worm made it his home. But how did the great worm get here? From where does he come? Who bore him? The great worm has always been. Don't interrupt. He made a home for himself in the very center of the world and said, "This world will be mine. It is made from hard stone, but I will gnaw my own passages in it. It is cold, but I will warm it with the heat of my body. It is dark, but I will light it with the light of my eyes. It is dead, but I will inhabit it with my creations." Who are the creations? The creations are the creatures the great worm issued from his womb. Both you and I, all of us, are his creations. There you have it. And then the great worm said, "Everything will be as I said, because this world henceforward is mine." And he began to gnaw passages through the hard stone, and the stone softened in his belly. Saliva and juice moistened it, and the stone became alive and began to bear the fungi. And the great worm, having gnawed the stone, let it pass through himself, and he did it thus for thousands of years, until his passages went through all the earth. 1,000? What? 1, 2, 3, how many? 1,000? You have 10 fingers on your hands. And Sharap has 10 fingers? No, Sharap has 12. That won't do. Let's say Grom has 10 fingers. If you take you, Grom, and other people so that altogether there were as many as you have fingers, they each of them all would have 10 times 10 each. This is 100. And 1,000, this is when it is 10 times each 100. That's a lot of fingers. I can't count them. And it's not important. When the great worm's paths appeared on the earth, his first work was finished, and then he said, "So I have gnawed thousands and thousands of paths through the hard stone, and the stone has been scattered into crumbs, and the grit has passed through my womb, and has become soaked with the juice of my life, and it has become alive. And earlier the stone had occupied all the space in the world, but now an empty place has appeared. Now there is a place for the children I shall bear." And his first creations came forth from his womb, the names of whom they no longer remember. And they were big and strong, like the great worm himself. And the great worm loved them. But there was naught for them to drink, for in the world there was no water, and they died of thirst. And then the great worm grieved. Grief was unknown to him before then, for there had been no one to love him, and he had not known solitude. But, having created new life, he had loved it, and it was difficult to part with it. And then the great worm began to cry, and his tears filled up the world. Thus water appeared, and he said, "See, now there is also a place so that one may live in it, and water, so that one may drink it. And the earth, sated by the juice of my womb, is alive, and it bears fungi. Now I shall make some creatures, I shall bear my children. They will live in the paths that I have gnawed, and drink of my tears, and eat the fungi grown in the juice of my womb." And he feared giving birth once more to huge creations like himself, for you see there was not enough space, or water, or fungi. At first he created the fleas, and then the rats, then the cats, and then the chickens, and then the dogs, and then hogs, and then man. But it did not turn out as he had thought. The fleas began to drink blood, and the cats to eat rats, and the dogs to oppress cats, and man to kill them all and eat them. And when man for the first time killed and ate another man, the great worm understood that his children had become unworthy of him, and he cried. And each time that man eats man, the great worm cries, and his tears flow through the passages and flood them. Man is good, the meat is tasty, sweet, but one can eat only his enemies, I know. Artyom clenched and unclenched the fingers on his hands. His hands were tied behind his back with a piece of wire, and they had become numb. But at least they were responding again. Even the fact that his whole body ached was now a good sign. The paralysis from the poisoned needle had turned out to be temporary. The idiotic idea spun in his head that he, in contrast to the unknown storyteller, had no memory of how chickens had got into the metro. No doubt, some merchants had succeeded in bringing them from some market somewhere. They had brought swine from one of the VDNKH pavilions, he knew. But chickens. He tried to see what was next to him, but around him was absolute inky darkness. However, someone was not too far away. It had already been half an hour since Artyom had come to. Gradually, he was becoming aware of where he was. "He is stirring. I can hear it," a hoarse voice said. "I'll call the commander. The commander will do the interrogation." Something had moved, then stopped. Artyom tried to stretch his legs. They, too, turned out to be bound with wire. He tried to roll over onto his other side and hit something soft. A long, drawn-out moan, full of pain, was heard. "Anton, is that you?" Artyom whispered. There was no answer. "Aha! The great worm's enemies have come too," someone said derisively in the darkness. "It would have been better had you not come too." It was that same broken sage voice that had been relating the story about the great worm and the creation of life for the past half hour. It immediately became clear that his keeper differed from the other inhabitants of the station. Instead of primitive, chopped phrases, he had been speaking properly, somewhat pompously, and even the timbre of his voice was completely human, unlike that of the others. "Who are you? Release us!" Artyom wheezed, moving his tongue with difficulty. Yes, that's just what they all say. No, unfortunately, wherever you were headed, your travels are over. They are going to torture and grill you. And what will you do?" The voice answered from the darkness with indifference. "Are you also imprisoned?" Artyom asked. "We all are in prison. They are releasing you this very day." His unseen companion giggled. Anton groaned again and began to stir. He mumbled something unintelligible, but had not yet regained consciousness. "Why are we sitting together in the darkness like cave dwellers?" A lighter was struck, and the spot of flame lit the face of the speaker. He had a long gray beard, dirty, matted hair, and dull, mocking eyes lost in a network of wrinkles. He could be no less than 60. He was sitting on a chair along the other side of the iron bars that broke the room in two. There was something like it at Vidienko, too. It had a strange name, the Monkey House. Artyom had seen monkeys only in biology textbooks and children's books. In any event, the facility was used as a prison. "There's no way I can get used to the damn darkness. I have to use this trash," the old man lamented, covering his eyes. "Well, why have you come here? Aren't there enough places on that side or something?" "Listen." Artyom didn't allow him to finish speaking. "You are free. You can let us out before these cannibals return. You're a normal man." "Of course I can," he answered, "but of course I will not. We make no deals with the enemies of the Great Worm." "What the hell is the Great Worm? And what are you talking about? I've never even heard of it, so I can't be its enemy." "It's not important whether you have heard of him or not. You came from that side, from where his enemies live, and that means you must be spies." The derisive rasping in the old man's voice had changed to a steely clacking. "You have firearms and flashlights, damned mechanical toys, machines for killing. What more evidence do you need to understand that you, the infidels, that you are the enemies of life, the enemies of the Great Worm?" He jumped up from his chair and approached the bars. "It is you and those who, like you, are guilty of everything." The old man put out the overheated lighter, and in the encroaching darkness, he was heard blowing on his burning fingers. Then a new voice called out. This one hissed and chilled the blood. Artyom grew frightened. He remembered Tretyak killed by a poisoned needle. "Please," he began to whisper fervently, "before it's not too late, why are you doing this?" The old man said nothing, and a minute later the place was filled with sounds, slaps of unshod feet on concrete, hoarse breathing, the whistling of air drawn through nostrils. Although Artyom didn't see any of those entering, he felt that all of them were studying him closely, looking, sniffing, listening to how loudly Artyom's heart beat in his chest. "The fire people. He smells like smoke, he smells like fear. One is the smell of the station from that side, the other is foreign. One, the other, they are enemies," someone hissed at last. "Let Vartan do it," another voice ordered. "Light the fire," someone commanded. The lighter was struck once more. In the room, besides the old man in whose hand the flame fluttered, stood 3 shaved savages, shading their eyes with their hands. Artyom already had seen one of them, the thick-set and bearded one. The other also seemed strangely familiar to him. Looking Artyom directly in the eyes, he took a step forward and stopped at the bars. The smell from him wasn't like from the rest. Artyom detected a faint stench of decomposed flesh emanating from this man. They couldn't stop staring at him. Artyom winced. He understood where he had seen this face earlier. It was the creature who had attacked him in the night at Kievskaya. A strange feeling seized Artyom. It was similar to the paralysis, only this time his mind was affected. His thoughts stood still, and he obediently opened his consciousness to the silent probing, through a hatch. The hatch had remained open. They had come for the boy, for Anton's son. They stole him in the night. I am guilty of it all. I allowed him to listen to your music through the pipe. I climbed into the handcar. We didn't tell anyone else. We arrived together. We didn't close it. Artyom answered the questions that arose in his head. It was impossible to resist or conceal anything from the soundless voice demanding the answers from him. Artyom's interrogator knew in a minute everything that was of interest. He nodded and stepped back. The fire was extinguished. Slowly, like feeling returning to a numbed hand, Artyom regained control. "Vovan, Kulak, return to the tunnel, to the passage." "Close the door," one of the voices ordered. Most likely it belonged to the bearded commander. "The enemies are to remain here. Drone will guard the enemies. There is a holiday tomorrow. The people will eat the enemies. They will honor the Great Worm." "What have you done with Oleg? What have you done with the child?" Artyom began wheezing after them. The door thudded hollowly.